All right. I'm just going to put the slides in the chat right now. I'm coming.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Um, so good day, everyone. Uh, I hope you're all doing well. So last time we had a class with Mr. Daniel on syntax, and today, uh, the last time we had the class, it was very insightful, and he gave us an introduction where he explained the foundation of syntax, where he traced its development from traditional grammar to modern theories, and even looked at references. Today, we are going to build on that foundation. So please, Mr. Daniel, you can go on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Someone asked for the first class. So what I just sent now was the first class, but what I sent earlier, that's for today. So I'm just going to share the screen and then we enjoy it. All right. Can you see my screen? Is it big enough?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So in case if it's not big enough, you can always let me know, but I think this should be fine. All right. So before we just continue with today's class, so in the WhatsApp chat, I think a question was dropped, which I'm just going to make a quick comment on so that we can continue about the difference between or if there is a difference between deep structure and LF, if I get that question right. So I think we said some things about it that was the last class 2 days ago, but maybe I'll just make it clearer. So yeah, they are different. So deep structure and LF are different, even though they have similarities. I mean, but they are actually different. And the difference lies in the fact that if you remember the last class, we discussed the two levels of representation of Chomsky, which is the deep structure and the surface structure, right? So LF deals more with the surface structure. And I mean, we know we can have a sentence that is both deep structure and surface structure. So if there is no transformation or any movement, if no movement has taken place, that same structure would look like, on the tree would look like the deep structure and also the surface structure, right? But you remember we discussed transformation where something is moving from somewhere to another place, and then that gives you like a surface structure. So the deep structure would be like the canonical position where each of those elements are merged inside the syntax, right? While the surface structure is when there is transformation. Now, LF usually operates at the surface structure. One evidence for that is, let me give an example in the chat. So if you have a sentence like, so if you say, which picture of himself, which picture of himself does Adam like, for example. So if you look at this sentence, it has of course a deep structure and the surface structure, and then the LF also is important to know. Now the surface structure is, you see that the WH phrase, that is which picture has moved right to the initial position, because this would mean the sentence, the deep structure would be Adam likes a picture of himself, basically, right? So Adam likes the picture of himself. But then when you have a transformation going on, movement, you have which picture of himself Adam likes. And in this case, the LF would still make you understand that this himself, even though it is not below Adam, it is still referring to Adam. Which we are still going to look at some of these examples into this class, right? So you have cases where the LF gives you the interpretation, or like the logical form, the meaning of what you have at the surface structure. And now there are also instances where you can actually have um, a single deep structure, but two LF interpretation. If you remember the ambiguous sentences that we looked at last week also, where it is the same string of words, the same sentences, but then you have different interpretation based on where different elements are in the sentence. So there's an example that is coming to my mind now, but I don't know if it will be simple enough. So if you say something again like everyone, so let's say everyone. I hope I'm able to make this very accessible. So everyone loves someone. So if you say a sentence like this, everyone loves someone, right? This the diff structure is just the way it is like this, but then it has a surface structure based on different LF. So you can see that you have different LF, like different interpretation, but one deep structure basically. Now, if you say everyone loves someone, it's ambiguous between everyone loves like a particular person, like loves someone, or it could be that there is someone or there is a person X that loves Y, and then Z loves another. So you see, you have like one-to-one correspondence. So where one person loves the other person, another person loves another person. So you have like this ambiguity when you say everyone loves someone, or it can also mean everyone, basically everyone loves one person. So depending on those two LFs, you can have different interpretation, right? Depending on this sentence, rather, you can have different interpretation of the sentence, but the deep structure remains. So it's, when you draw your tree, you have exactly like this, where you have the subject, the verb, and then the object. But at LF, you have different structure, and there are, of course, ways of even syntactically representing what is going on. You know, there's something they call usually you use a quantifier raising here. So the someone has to raise to get one interpretation, and in the other interpretation, it remains at that spot. So you can see that you have like on the surface this sentence, everyone loves someone, but at the LF you have two interpretation. You see that now. So that's one way to distinguish between deep structure and LF. Even though they might look similar, or they might it might be confusing, but they are different. So I think what you should take from this is that LF operates on surface structure more than on deep structure. And usually you get LF operating with deep structure when you have what is called reconstruction, when something reconstructs back to its original position. Right. All right. So maybe some of the things I'm going to discuss today would also bring some clarity to that question and the other questions that you might have. Okay, let's start with a very quick recap of last class, right? So we started by looking at traditional grammar, and we actually saw that they are based. I mean, traditional grammar was based on prescribed rules, and also the fact that the languages that were, you know, used to bring these rules or to prescribe these rules were majorly on ancient, we are majorly ancient Greek and Latin. So it didn't cover many languages, and even the rules that were prescribed, where they lacked basically explanatory power. So it's more like does and don'ts. So you do this, you don't do this. You put full stop, you don't do this, or you don't split infinitive and all those things, right? So it lacks. So TG basically lacked explanatory power. We saw that last week, and it also did not give attention to language acquisition, which is what Chomsky generative grammar tries to do. So giving attention to language acquisition. So not just describing or not just prescribing rules. So Chomsky's, we also saw last week that Chomsky's generative approach to language actually started by considering these three levels of adequacy, which is the first is the observational adequacy, descriptive adequacy, and explanatory adequacy. And this is important because we saw that uh, the aim of generative approach or enterprise basically is to actually look at the native speaker intuition. So what exactly is there in the native speaker's mind? So how do we explain, not just describe, but also explain what is there? So why do speakers use the language in this way? and what is even universal about the language. So these are some of the questions that were raised that bettered the transformational generative grammar and even the succeeding, the different models that there are, and which we are going to see one of them today. Another thing we saw last class we discussed was that the TGG has some major landmarks. The first is that there is the two levels representation, which I just discussed earlier, the deep structure and the surface structure. There is also division of sentence, into different subconstituents, and we used constituency test, if you recall, like ellipses, replacement, and the likes. And another landmark of the TGG that we started looking at last week is the explicit representation of sentences using phrase structure rules, right? So they were rules or they are that were used to map sentence structure. So these rules are important for us to make explicit what is in the mind, basically. So how sentences are structured, right? And also we saw that with TGG, language analysis became interesting and with much descriptive power, of course, right? Because they were more machinery or tools that were used to describe the language. But we ended last class that even though TGG, the earlier stage, right, was very interesting, it came with a cost. It came with a cost because language became, more complex. Like the analysis of language became more complex, and with that also came the question of how children can acquire such complex system. So the PS rules, and we saw that the PS rules also has there is, apart from the PS rules, there is also the transformation rules when there is movement and the likes, right? So there were many rules, and even within these rules, there is also ordering. We saw the case of ordering to be able to get the right structure, like the imperatives, for example. So apart from the many rules and the fact, yes, we know that it gave us much power as syntacticians, right? We can do a lot, but then it came with many rules, and then apart from those many rules, there is reordering or like ordering of those rules. So it became a problem, and with the question, how then will the child acquire such complex rules and even the ordering of such rules? So that is why there is now a need, right? So there was a need to move beyond descriptive adequacy to explanatory adequacy. So which we the aim should not be to only describe the language, but also to be able to explain why certain things are the way they are, right? Why, for example, why is a child like why is he able to learn language so effortlessly? All you need to do basically is expose the child to a language community, and then he's able to acquire it effortlessly. So why? So why not just to describe what is in that state of mind, but why is it there? Like to explain. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll start with today. So in today's class, we will look at the question how, what are there, what are the things in the mind of a child or even the speaker of a language that makes him or her able to, maneuver or even play with language, if you call it that way, effortlessly. All right. So let's set the stage. So in order to go deeper into the so today basically we'll be looking at principles and parameters. That's popularly called the government and binding theory. So that's the aim for today, just to set that straight from now. But then what are these starting stage? So what were the things that motivated, apart from the questions that we raised earlier, right? That I raised earlier. What are the things that motivated Chomsky? What were even the things that he wanted to achieve by uh, proposing the principles and parameters theory, basically. Okay, so I don't know if there is any question. Let me check the chat. Okay. All right. So if okay, someone is raising your hand. Can you go ahead, please? Oh, I, um, I can't hear you. I think the network is.
I think the guy is speaking in tongues, right?
Actually want
You know,
has
supposed to
different.
Mm.
Can you hear me?
No.
Can you,
Now we can. I think I can hear you now.
hello?
Was he speaking in tongues?
I don't, I don't know because I think it was his network. But then, okay. So if you are back, you can always unmute yourself and ask the question you want to ask. All right.
I think he put the question in the chat.
Okay. Okay. Let me see. What's meant? Okay, there are two questions actually. So I wanted to ask the difference between LF and okay, good. And then what's meant by okay, let me start with the first one. So like I said earlier, right? So it's very important to actually dissociate these different terminology. I know it can be very confusing, but there are cut out differences from them, right? So what I said earlier was that LF is like it operates on surface structure. I didn't say LF is surface structure. No, right? The same way LF is not deep structure, right? But LF, no, and not just LF, PF. If you remember, we looked at PF also 2 days ago, right? So both LF and PF, they can operate, with both deep and surface. But so when it comes to LF, it actually operates more, or even PF even operates more with surface structure, right? So it's like when you have a simple example is if you have like a movement, just movement, right? So like the example I gave earlier, or even a simple movement construction, right? So the deep structure of a sentence would be something like assuming in English, right? English where you don't have maybe head movement of some sort. So if you say something like Adam ate rice, now I'm using this on the basic level, right? Because we know that in recent theory you actually still move the verb, even though there is no V to T movement in English, but there's still a movement from the big VP to the little VP. So let's not go into those details. Let's assume that we just have the big VP, right? And then you have the subject in the spec of the big VP, you have the verb in the head of the V, and then you have the object as the complement of the V. Now that just gives you a deep structure. So it's like the canonical position of each of those elements that you put in the structure. That is a deep structure before you start doing transformation, right? And transformation, like we discussed on Tuesday, was it Tuesday? On Monday, is not just about W8 movement alone, even head movement. When you move some things inside the structure, that's already transformation going on. So when that happens, then you have surface structure. Now with that surface structure comes LF and PF. So it's like a Y inverted. I wish I maybe the next class I will put that inverted Y model so that will help. So you have like a Y model where after the surface structure, the phonetic or the phonological form, that's the pronunciation, basically the articulation. And then it also has the LF form, which is the interpretation. You interpret it. So that is why Adam ate rice would mean Adam ate rice. But if you now say, what did Adam eat? It now you're having a question. So at the LF, you have question. It's no longer a declarative sentence. You see that now? So the surface structure is like the input to both PF, you can put it that way, and LF. So the LF would give interpretation of what you have in the surface structure, right? It doesn't mean it's the same because even in the surface structure, you can have LF that will require that you reconstruct. I don't know if you are familiar with that term. So reconstruction is basically saying, even though you've done transformation and now you have LF, right? You have to take back. So let's use the example I gave earlier. So in the example I gave earlier, if you remember when I said which picture of himself did Adam does Adam love? If I get it, yeah, does Adam love, right? Now, even though in the surface structure, which picture is high, right? It precedes, like it's now in the sentence initial position. But at LF, it would have to reconstruct, that it has to go back to its original position so that it can be able to refer back to Adam. Do you see that? So if you there should be a way to type here. Let me see. Mhm. This works. Okay, good. So let's try with this. Okay, so mm, no, this is not what this out. Okay, fine. Which picture of himself does Adam like? I want to make this bigger. Yeah, good. Oh, very nice. Yeah. Now, look at this sentence. Now, which picture of himself? Yeah. So the way it would be initially would be what you have was Adam likes a picture of himself, right? So that is what you have initially. So Adam likes a picture of himself, where now a picture of himself. Now we want to make a WH question out of it, like basically a delink kind of question. So you now say, which picture of himself does Adam like? Now, even though with what we just observed, we just moved a picture of himself to this position. So now we have which picture of himself. Okay, this is not showing what. Okay, now we've moved which picture of himself to the sentence initial position, and that is what's it called? Surface structure. So this construction is the surface structure of what we have above. Now, the LF, what LF does is that even though we have a case where which picture of himself is in the sentence initial position, it would have to, in order to get the right interpretation where himself will refer back to Adam, we would have to assume what is called in syntax reconstruction. So it's like which picture of himself has to reconstruct back, it has to go back to this position. It has to return back at LF. You can see that in the surface structure, it is actually in this position, right? In the surface structure, it is in the sentence initial position. That's surface structure. But LF says because of himself, it has to refer to Adam, and there is a condition for that. We'll get to that today. What happened is that which picture of himself had to reconstruct back to its earlier position, and that is what you can. That's why you can. That's now how you can get interpretation at LF. You can now see that that's one way to distinguish between surface structure and LF. Even though surface structure says in surface structure you get the which picture of himself high in the clause like sentence initial position, but at LF it is assumed that it is interpreted lower in the clause in order to refer back to Adam. So that's one distinction between LF and surface structure. Okay, I think someone was raising his hand. I don't know if the hand is now it's no longer. I need to take this out.
Okay.
So someone have, is that a question?
Sure.
Okay, I guess it's not a question. Another thing. I need to take this out.
Empty carton.
Okay, yeah, good. All right, is that clear? Can I get a feedback so that I know? Is it clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
All right, thank you. So let's move on. Actually, we have quite a lot today, and I don't want to rush because there are many interesting stuff we'll be discussing. Where is this? I need to clean this now. Yeah. Okay. Mm. Okay, forget about this. Let's just continue. So now let's come back. So what we again, just to in case you because of the discussion I just had now, maybe you've traveled somewhere else in your mind. What we are looking at is how Chomsky's after the PS approach, that is the phrase structure, rules and everything, what like the newer or um the development, right, which is the principles and parameters theory. And now we want to look at how the stage was set. So what were the things, what are the motivations, apart from the question of how children acquire language, what were the other, syntactic motivation to the principles and parameters theory, right? So again, we know that the aim of Chomsky's syntax is to have a deeper understanding of the underlying principles of the observed facts in languages, right? We want to know what are the underlying properties, or what are the things that actually motivate the way sentences are structured, or even the relations within a sentence. And so this actually takes precedence over setting out rules that explain the fact of the language. So not just about the rules, but the underlying properties. And the gist is that if we are able to get the underlying properties, then we know why certain things happen in languages, right? So instead of just saying, the thing is, if the more rules you give, or the more facts we get in a language, that means we'll keep giving new rules and many, even many more rules. And at the end of the day, you have many rules, but that's not what we want. We want to, make it very simple. And how do we do that? By looking at the underlying properties of, languages, and then in a way which we're able to now unify those properties. So it's like if you have rule A to Z, and then, I mean, just like the phonologist, right? You remember natural class. So different distinctive features can now begin to form natural classes. So that is the aim of the principal and parameters theory, that instead of having, numerous rules out there just scattered around, we can actually begin to find natural classes to these rules, whereby these natural classes, which are called principles that we are going to see now, they constitute the underlying principles of every language, right? And anything we see on the surface that may differ from English, maybe English and German, or Yoruba and Hausa, are just parameters. But underlyingly, there are principles that are the same among those languages. Okay, so in order to make sense of this, let's look at Ireland, for example. I remember we started, we said one or two things in the last class about Ireland, so I'm going to say more things now, in case if you are not familiar with it. I think this would help. Remember, we want to take different rules and then make a generalization and just have a natural class, so that we don't have too many rules out there. So one of the things Chomsky rules out there. So one of the things Chomsky okay. So I can actually hear myself. I think it's okay.
Sorry, it is somebody that muted themselves and I'm unmute themselves. I'm trying to mute them and it's not working. Chomsky,
all right.
this guy is not doing his duty.
Yeah, yes, even me too. I can't unmute him.
The person is more powerful than all of us.
I think we will begin to remove people that refuse to unmute themselves. I don't know, so that don't disrupt the audio quality of the class.
Yeah.
Sorry
Okay.
about that.
All right. So let's look at Ireland. But before we look at Ireland, let's even look, because usually, yes, islands, people discuss islands, but before Ireland actually became popular, Chomsky already started something that looks similar. Because I mean, as you will see soon, usually we attribute Ireland to this guy, Rose. So in his thesis, MIT thesis, 1967, he discussed a lot of islands. But before that, Chomsky has some, things that looked like, island, or like restriction to movement, basically. And that is what he called this A over A condition. So Chomsky proposed this condition, the A over A condition. Look at the definition in one. And I'm going to explain that with two. So A over A condition says that this is just a simplified version, that no extraction or movement of a constituent of category A, very important, if it is contained within a larger constituent of the same category A. So it's like if you have an NP embedded inside an NP, you should not be able to move that deeply embedded NP above the NP that embeds that NP. I don't know if you get that now. So look at 2A. Now in 2A, you have which book did Adam read? Now this sentence is fine, because what we did here is more like you can call it by piping kind of. So we took the whole of the NP that is in this object position. Okay, now I can begin to use my, yeah. So which book was in this position, then we fronted everything, right? And then we have which book did Adam read. Now, this did no violation of A over AY because nothing moved outside, nothing is subtracted from within the which book. We moved the whole constituent. But now compare that with 2B. Now in 2B, all we just did was we subtracted which, the WH phrase, to the sentence initial position. And that is a violation of A over AY because which itself, even though it's a WH phrase, we know that it's still a nominal, it's like an NP. We treat it as an NP. So now it's like we have an NP embedded inside another NP. So which is an NP embedded inside the larger NP, that is this one. And remember, A over A says you don't move A out of another A. So now we have moved an NP out of another NP. And that is a violation of the A over A principle. And that is why 2B is now ungrammatical, because it violates A over A. 2A is fine because that did not, nothing was violated because the whole complex or the big NP was actually fronted. Nothing was subtracted. Now, take note of that. Now, this condition then took different shapes. So conditions on, extraction of movement or even constraints on extraction of movement took different shapes in the form of islands, right? And beginning from Rowe's dissertation, 1967. So let's consider some islands. So what we want to see is different constraints to movement. Now, the first one is the complex noun phrase constraint. And what complex noun phrase means basically is a noun phrase that takes either a relative clause or even a complement clause. But in this case, what we have in 3A is a noun phrase taking a relative clause. So this is a noun phrase, this is the man, and it takes a relative clause, who ate rice, right? How is it a relative clause? Because it gives information about the man. So which man? The man who ate rice, basically. So this is a complex noun phrase, and it's assumed to be an island. Why? How do we know? Because if you move anything out of this island, it's ungrammatical, as in 3B. So if we try to move the object of the relative clause, that is rice, and we make it a WH phrase and we move it out from that island, again, just assume island as, island, right? So when you are in a physical island, it's assumed that maybe there is just an island and then there is ocean or river, whatever around it where you cannot move out. So that is the intuition behind this, where when you are in an island, then you should not be able to, you cannot move out of it. If you do, then it's like the person is in trouble, right? That's the same thing that is happening here. So when we try to move rice, or we make it a WH phrase, and we try to move it to the sentence initial position, what did Adam saw? The man who ate. It's bad. And that is a complex noun phrase constraint, that you cannot move out of a complex noun phrase. And like I said, the complex noun phrase is a phrase that takes either a relative clause or even a complement clause. Okay, that is one. Another island constraint is the WH island constraint. The WH island constraint is more like a complement of the verb that begins with a WH phrase, basically. So look at look at 4A. So Adam wondered why Sam beat the child. Now, the complement of the verb wonder is um clause, basically. And this clause is added, it starts with a WH phrase, why. And so it is called a WH island constraint, or WH island, because you cannot, if you try to move out from this construction or from this clause, it becomes ungrammatical. So if you say 4B, who did Adam wonder why Sam beat? That is ungrammatical because it's assumed that you don't move out of a clause that is you can say that has a WH phrase. And there is a reason for that. I'm not going to go into the detail. There's a reason for that because it's assumed that usually when you are moving, you move in steps, right? So if you try to move the WH phrase from this position, it should first land. There should be an intermediate step. It should land in a position here, but that position is already occupied by the Y. And so it means it would have to move in a long distance. So it moves like this, and that is disallowed. Now, all these things are just to give what will be the motivation that we are going to see. Like these are one of the motivations of, so we have these different constraints, but then the aim is to look at underlying principles that can actually account for all this. So we don't need to have many rules. We can actually have, certain principles that can actually explain what we are seeing here, basically. Okay, so that is the WH island constraint. So you don't move out of an island or a clause that starts with a WH, basically. And then in 5, sentential subject constraint. We know subjects can be simple, just Adam can be a subject, but then subject can also be a complex subject, like can be a sentence, basically. And that's what we have in 5a, that Adam arrived early, surprised Sam. The subject of the verb surprise is actually the whole of this clause, that Adam arrived early, and that is called a sentential subject. So a sentence that is a subject. And now the constraint says you don't move out of sentential subject. You should not move out of it. And when you try to do that, the sentence becomes ungrammatical. And that's what we have in 5b. So if you say who that arrived early, so we are moving the subject of the sentential subject. So if you say who that arrived early surprised Sam, that's ungrammatical because we just moved out of a sentential subject, which is an island. And we must not do that. And then lastly, there are many more islands, but we don't need to go through all of them. So lastly, the coordinate structure constraint. So what this says is that you don't move out of a coordinate structure or a coordinate phrase, a conjunction phrase. Now look at 6a. In 6a, the object of the verb cook is actually this conjunction phrase. So the rice and stew. So Adam cooked the rice and the stew, basically. And the constraint says you don't move any of them. You can't move either the first conjunct, rice, or the second conjunct, the stew. You don't move any of them. And if you try to do that, the sentence becomes ungrammatical. And that's what happened in 6b and 6c. So 6b, what did Adam cook the rice and? What did we do? We moved the second conjunct out of this whole coordinate structure. And by doing that, it's ungrammatical. And in 6c, we are moving the first conjunct from out of this coordinate structure. What did Adam cooked and the stew? Again, non-grammatical. So all these constraints, they are island, all these structures rather, they are islands, and because they are islands, the constraint says you don't move out of them. So when you move out of them, those islands are violated, and then it causes ungrammaticality. Let me check the chat if there's any question before I continue. Okay, yes, we are in linguistic island. All right. I don't think there is any. Oh, this question on head movement, let's leave it for now, please. We can talk about it during next class or something. I just mentioned it. I don't want to go into details of some of these things, right? So just bear with me, right? Please. Okay. And then let me see if there's any question. Is W island constraint the same as subjacency? Very nice question. How do I? Okay. So WH Island is, like I'm going to show right now, is actually subsumed, and not just WH Island alone. There are many other islands that is subsumed under subjacency. So subjacency is what we are going to look at. So in fact, I have it here under what now? Bounding, yeah. So bounding that actually restricts, the locality of movement. So there is subjacency, there is even barrier, that's the development. So after the subjacency, you have barrier, and then you have the relativized minimality. We will look at all those, in this handout. Yeah, I have it in the handout. We'll look at them. But WH island is you remember I said that the aim right now is that all these constraints, in fact, one of the reasons I give this constraint is to show that all these constraints we now see that they are subsumed under a principle whereby we can now be able to even explain each of them based on different principles. So we don't need to, I mean, we still make use of constraint, of course. If you are doing movement analysis, you want to argue for movement analysis, you use constraint like this, islands. So islands actually help you to be able to argue that something has moved from somewhere. So the fact that 3b, for example, is ungrammatical is an evidence for movement. Because if it is grammatical, maybe if you do like in Yoruba, if you have like topicalization, focus construction in Yoruba, of course, you can say it involves movement, or even many of these our languages, right? But topicalization mostly involves base generation, and you can use island to argue for that, because with topicalization, if you have the topic very high and the island is not violated, that is an evidence for non-movement. So when island is so if you move out of an island and then the sentence is grammatical rather, that is an evidence of non-movement. So for example, if in English, if you say, let me see, so Adam saw the man who ate rice. Now in English, you can say the rice. No, you can say yeah, the rice, or as for the rice. Let's make as for the rice, Adam saw the man who ate it. That's fine. And that is fine because you didn't move anything out of any island. So again, Adam saw the man who ate rice, right? That should be an island, as in 3a. But now you can actually say as for the rice, whereby as for the rice is now in the sentence initial position. As for the rice, Adam saw the man who ate it. That is grammatical. And the reason for that is because nothing moved. It didn't move. As for the rice did not move from inside the island. It actually base generate. It's like it is merged, that high position. Nothing, it didn't move from anywhere. That's why it is grammatical. So you can actually use island to argue for movement and non-movement. Whenever island is violated, it involves movement. And when it is not, it is involved base generation. Okay, so let's move on. Now, so as more and more islands and movement constraints were discovered, there were also counterexamples that were raised. There were examples that were actually shown that predictably they should violate island, but they did not. So for example, let's look at remember the A over A condition, right, of Chomsky, that says you should not move a phrase like NP out of another NP. Basically, that is the condition. But if you look at 7, A and B, in 7b, we can see a counterexample of the A over A condition. Okay, look at 7a first. So 7a, you have Adam ate the fruit that tasted sour. Now, the whole of this phrase is an NP. But then we know that, remember the constituency test, we did that in the last class, right? The fruit itself is also a constituent, which is an NP. Now, what A and A over A condition says is that we should not be able to move this NP, the fruit, out of this bigger NP, because it's like you are moving A over A, you are moving NP over another NP. The condition says we should not be able to do that. But then 7b actually says otherwise. Like 7b, you can actually say, what did Adam eat that tasted sour? So what we just did, we just moved that NP, we fronted that NP and we moved it out of the bigger NP. And that contradicts the A over A condition, right? So because A over A condition predicts, the prediction of A over A condition is that this sentence should be ungrammatical, but it is grammatical. So this is one counter example that we're talking about. So more and more counter examples have been suggested or have been shown with respect to the island constraints. And apart from even the counter examples, there are other studies that have actually shown how many of these constraints, I mean, there are people who believe that it is not syntactic; it's more of language acquisition, or even not being able to pass the sentences. That's why they are constraints. So yeah, there is different views here and there. But for us, I think what is important is that there are counterexamples to these different constraints. So let's move on. So the discovery of more and more constraints only made syntax more complex, right? So the more constraints we have and the more rules we will need for them to account for them. So it makes, if the syntax, remember we want to make syntax simpler, but it seems it's looking even more complex, right? But we know that the aim is to simplify the theory and if possible, to unify, this is important, to unify the body of constraints. And in order to do this, different models of movement constraints were proposed. One of it, or the earliest, okay, not even the earliest, but one of it was barriers. So barrier, that we're going to look at that soon. It is like it actually brings together this body of constraints and then gives explanation for why we have such constructions. Another example, or like the one that is more recent, or maybe not even recent, but that is really what people are really looking at right now. Yeah, that's the faces. So where different faces, so you don't move out of faces, and if you want to move out of a face, there is a way you have to do that. So these are the different terminologies or different principles, or you can call it different constraints rather, that actually generalize. It's like more like a generalization of these sub constraints, right? Okay, so moving forward, I don't know if there's any question yet. No question. Okay, if you have question, you can raise your hand. I think now I'm able to, I'll be able to see your hand. If you have a question, just raise your hand for clarity's sake. So we are taking it a step at a time, and it will be very important if we can be on the same page. I really do not want to lose anyone. So please, if you have any question, just feel free, raise your hand, and then you can ask your question. Okay, please go ahead, Ma.
Looking at some of the examples you gave, like 4A, 4B, 5B, and 6B, they were sounding like a child's expression, child language, a child that does not know how to express himself or herself very well in English language. So I think these examples seem to have implication for how a child acquires language, because what I saw was the child is just bringing out the pictures that are in his mind without thinking of how to coordinate, but just projecting these pictures in those words. I don't know what you have to say about that.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I mean, before I even answer your question, nice to see you again, Yema. We've met before, and I'm glad. I wanted to know, then now I know you are the one. Nice to see you. All right. Yes, right. So the aim of this, right, is just to show what is ungrammatical, right? So, so maybe I should say this. Maybe I just imagine everyone knows this. So whenever you see asterisk, it shows ungrammaticality, right? So when we use in linguistics, when we use asterisks like this, what we show is that that sentence is ungrammatical. And yes, you're right. So of course, the aim is to show that if when children see such language, such construction, something like this, we assume that children should be able to, or not just even children, like language speakers would know, okay, this is not grammatical. And the aim also is to show that a child, even in his mind, even when he makes certain mistake, it's not the lack of competence, really. It's just the lack of performance or something at that moment, because the belief again of generative grammar is that the grammar in the mind, or the rule, I don't want to use the rule, the possibilities of the linguistic phenomena, like in the mind of the child or of a language speaker, is perfect. But of course, in order to analyze the perfection and even what we see in the language, we have to look at the imperfections, or what is not. So what is not will actually help us to know, okay, what are the basic principles that actually guide the way we use language. Exactly. And in fact, it will be in a way maybe surprising if we find child always or producing such kind of construction like 3B. because I mean, what did Adam saw the man who ate? For example, if the child does that, yeah, I mean that is possible, but it doesn't show it. It just shows that okay, that level of the performance level, what the child is trying to you know um alter, or what the child is trying to say, is still at the you can call it developmental stage, basically. But we know as a native speaker who has a developed grammar, you won't say that. You won't say this ungrammatical constructions, basically. I see something in the chat. Yeah, nice. Very, very, very important question you asked there. If these constraints are English specific or universal. Now, no. The answer is no, a categorical no, because, and there are different reasons for why some languages. Maybe you tried your language. That's why you asked that question. Maybe you look at your language and then you saw that maybe one of these constraints are not are not um are not like they are violable like in your language. Maybe that's why I asked that question. So for example, the coordinate structure constraint, for sure, I know that one. In many of our languages, we can use resumptive pronoun to actually repair. There's something we call island repair, where you can repair these islands with resumptive pronoun. So for example, what did in 6b, what did Adam cook and the rice? What did Adam cooked the rice and eat? So in English, even if you include a resumptive pronoun like it, for example, if you put a pronoun, it is still ungrammatical. You can't say what did Adam cooked the rice and eat. No. But in some languages you can, like Yoruba, for example. Kini Adam ṣe, or kini Adam ṣe ìrẹsì àti something like that. I mean, it can be marked. Let me put a question mark there. It can be marked because I remember there was a discussion on this between what you can actually extract, whether this is the second conjunct or even the first conjunct. There are some languages where either of these conjunct is preferred. So, for example, some languages say, okay, if you have resumptive pronoun when you extract the first conjunct, then it is fine, but not with the second conjunct. And that also has an explanation, because what you see is that this position is closer than this position. So there are different explanations for that actually. But the answer to your question is no. Not all these constraints. They are when it first came out, yes, it was termed universal, but recent literature has shown that that's not true. So there are many languages that have shown that some of these different constraints are actually not islands. Some of these constructions they are not islands in some languages. I think there is a study by Candy Bowish, Jason Candy Bowish, on one interesting language. I want to remember. Is it Kratchi? I don't know. I'm not sure if it's Kratchi, but there's a language where he actually showed. It's even a recent paper, I think this year or last year, where he showed that many of the islands, and that's very interesting. Many of the constraints or many of the things we call island in that language, they are not islands. That means movement is allowed from those constructions. And that's very interesting. All right. I hope that answers your question. So again, let's not lose track. What we are looking at is we want to make all these islands or all these constraints. We want to be able to put them under one umbrella. And I said that one way, or one of the frameworks that Chomsky developed to show that to do that to account for that was barriers. And then we also have we have the faces, right? I think maybe on Friday when we talk about minimalism, we look at faces or facehood. But today we are not going to touch that. So we just look at barriers and subjacency, like someone asked earlier. And then another aim, right? So if you remember, we say that we want to actually move beyond descriptive adequacy to explanatory adequacy, right? And the aim is to actually identify commonalities between different rules and transformations, like we started looking at, and also to reduce. And this, I mean, when we do that, so if we try to look at the commonalities, that is the common what is common among different rules, that will help us to actually reduce the number of rules and transformations, right? So remember, that was one of the weakness of the PS rule and transformation rules, whereby there are many PS rules, there are many transformation rules, depending on what you are doing. But now what we want to do is the different transformations, we should be able to actually more like coalesce or like merge them together to have a principle that can explain them. So if you look at 8 shows different transformations. In 8a, we have a question, right? What did Adam eat? That's a question. In 8b, we have relativization. So the rice that Adam ate, okay, they should be ate. So the rice that Adam ate was full of worm. Now you have relativization in this case. And in 8c, you have a cleft. It was rice that Adam ate, right? It's a cleft because you have an expletive followed by a copula, and then you have a relative construction, rice that Adam ate, basically. So we have a cleft. You also have a pseudo cleft in 8d, and the difference between cleft and pseudo cleft is just the use of so in pseudo cleft you have to use a WH. So what Adam ate was rice. So it's a pseudo cleft. And in 8e, we have passivization. So if you say something like Adam ate rice, but then if you passivize that, you have the rice was eaten by Adam, right? And that's what you have in 8c. Now, these are all transformations. So different constructions, right, that are realized by different transformations. So actually, what Chomsky said is now we can actually reduce the different transformations rules involved in these constructions to just move alpha. If you remember, I think towards the end of the last class, we were discussing move alpha and affect alpha, right? So Chomsky tried to, again, to make our explanatory machinery as simple as possible and also as powerful as possible. We can now say, okay, all these transformations that would result in different rules can actually be merged together. I mean, we can say they form a natural class basically. And what does that mean by forming a natural class? It is because they all involve movement. So one thing that is common to all of them is that even though they look differently on the surface, but they have a single operation going on, which is movement. And then it says, okay, now we can just say move alpha, where alpha basically means more like a generic term. So move alpha, move something, and that is what you have in 9, right? Move any category anywhere. So move alpha is basically a generalized transformational rules which simply licenses movement of any category and not just WH phrases alone, right? Because if you look at 8b, for example, where you have relativization, this is not a WH phrase movement. It's just a movement of the head noun from the relative clause. And then the other ones also like 8e, no WH movement in 8e. So the alpha here stands for the different movement. And then if you say move alpha, you just move a category from one position to another position. However, is that a question? Okay. Can you give the name of the author? What do you mean? Author of what? Is it move alpha? If it's author of move alpha, of course, this is the author. This is the author. And that's the year he proposed it. That's Chomsky. So move alpha. And this is the definition in 9. However, not all transformations involve movement, right? Because move alpha says move any category anywhere. Basically, it says every transformation that involves movement can be categorized under one umbrella called move alpha. But we know that movement is just one type of transformation. There are other transformations. For example, do support and even ellipsis. Look at 10. So in 10a, you have Adam did eat rice. That is called verum focus. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So verum focus is more like a focus that actually asserts the truth of a proposition. It gives the truth. If so, you can say Adam ate rice, right? Adam ate rice, and then you want to affirm it. He did eat rice, or he did eat rice. So now you have a case of do support or even insertion, basically, because you just inserted a do in order to get that interpretation. And not just with this example, there are other examples where you have do support, right? If you have, for example, yes or no questions, did Adam eat rice? You need a do support. And in that case, no movement occurred. It's unlike subject auxiliary inversion, right? If you have an auxiliary, for example, Adam will eat rice, then you can do the inversion by saying, will Adam eat rice? And that one, there is movement occurring, right? Will would have to move high. But if there is no auxiliary, then you have to do support. And there is no movement because the do, so did Adam eat rice? Adam eat rice remains there, but then you have to include a do to be able to get the yes or no question. And that is inserted. It's not movement. You see? So that is why we have to expand the terminology beyond move alpha, because move alpha move alpha only covers movement. Another issue with move alpha is ellipsis, right? Again, with ellipsis in 10b, you have a sentence like Adam ate rice and Sam did too. So basically, we elided or you delete ate rice, the VP. And in this case, there is no movement. You basically just delete. So because of such constructions, because these are also transformations, because they're transformations in the sense that it changed the sentence. The sentence was like this before, and then it became like this. It changes. So the sentence in 10a was Adam ate rice. But then because we want to focus on the proposition, the truth condition, we say Adam did eat rice. So it's also a transformation, but did not or does not involve movement. And because of this, Lasnik and Saito proposed that we can actually advance or develop move alpha from just move alpha, but we can call it affect move, where affect ranges over the operations of movement, insertion, and deletion, for example. So basically, this covers not just movement, it covers insertion like do support, it also covers deletion like ellipsis. So this principle of transformation can then be ascribed to the language faculty, basically that affect alpha belongs to it's in the language faculty of every speaker. That is why every speaker knows how to undo different constructions and the ones not to pronounce, like the island constraint that we saw earlier. And this has two interesting results. The first is that it actually brings reduction in the number of rules, making the task of language acquisition easier for the child, right? Because now, instead of having the different transformation rules, the question rule, passivization rule, cleft rule, and everything, we can just say there is move alpha, or rather affect alpha. So it reduced the number of rules, and that makes the task of language acquisition easier for the child. And secondly, the notion of construction, like passive, relative questions, can be eliminated from the theory. Even though we still use this notion, right? We still use this notion, but the aim is that we can actually eliminate these notions and just say move alpha, basically. All right. Before we continue, any question at this point? I'm going to be asking you if you have question at every section so that we will be on the same page. Any question? Okay. Now, with all this, remember what we did so far, it was just to set the stage, right? So the starting point, so some of the motivations, or like more like the um um collapsing different rules and making it quite simple, right? And then that actually led to the beginning of the elimination of PS rules. Remember the earlier model of TDG, that is the transformational generative grammar, the earlier stage proposed the PS rules in order to have our structure explicitly represented, whether through a tree or bracket. But then we have the PS, the phrase structure rules that tells us what to bring together, what to pick, and how to build our sentence from subconstituents. But now At this point, the PS rules became redundant, and you will see why. It became redundant. Okay, so the question is, does this implies that at this point, the PS rule and transformation is no more needed? Not really, right? Remember, we are still at the, I mean, you can say this is still the infant stage. This was the infant stage of the principle and parameters theory, right? What we've seen so far was just the infant stage. I mean, as time goes on, you will see, like I said earlier, some of these transformations, we still use the name. In fact, like we will see also on Friday, some of the terminologies or even the principles that were developed for principles and parameters theory were abandoned or had to be abandoned. And some cannot be abandoned because, I mean, or have not been abandoned. Let me put it that way. So it's like I don't want you to take these different models or these different levels of the theory. I don't want you to take it in a way where you feel okay, now we discard this entirely. Remember, it's more like a thread that is woven in a way, and then the more it goes up, the more it gets lean. So whatever we take from the PS rule, as time goes on, you will see that there are replacements for what we call PS rule. So even though the underlying assumption remains, but it's more like the tools, or even the tools, because the tools for the PS rule and the earlier stage of generative grammar, remember we said it was complex, it has many rules, and then those many rules had to also be ordered. So, but now the underlying assumption, which is to make language as explicit as possible, and also to look at how it is being acquired, that underlying assumption, it still remains. What we just want to do is we are trying to look for to make our analysis or whatever we are using machinery to be explanatorily adequate. So not just to describe the language, but to be able to explain what is going on in the mind of the speaker. Okay, so the endeavor to simplify or to coalesce the different transformation rules coincides with the beginning of the elimination of the PS rule. And one major reason why the PS rule had to be eliminated is actually because of redundancy. And that is because information, I'm going to show that now, information that are present in the PS rules had to be repeated in the lexicon. Now look at the example. Let me use this example in 11 to explain that. So if you look at 11 and 12, beginning with 11. So 11, the verb bribe, again, don't forget, what we're trying to look at is why was the PS rule, like what motivated the elimination, and the motivation was redundancy. And I want to look at what does that mean? Like, how does it, like, what do we mean by PS rule being redundant? Now, the verb bribed in 11a, we know is a two-place predicate, right? Because it takes Adam. So again, I am maybe I am assuming a lot, but when you say something is two-place predicate, it's more like it takes two arguments basically. So it takes Adam as one argument or a noun, and then it also takes the police as another argument. So we call it a two-place predicate. So usually transitive verbs are two-place predicates, while intransitive verb like slumber, they are one-place predicate because it doesn't take any object. It only has a subject. And then we have three-place predicates. Those are the ditransitive, right? So Adam gave the book to Sam. So you have three DPs or three NPs, three arguments with that verb give. So different predicates. Now, in 11a, you have a two-place predicate, which is bribe. And then in 11a rather, but in 11b, the sentence is non-grammatical. Why? Because if you say Adam bribed, the question is who. So we know, and how do we know? It is the lexicon that makes us know. Remember, we spoke about the mental lexicon and how it is different from the dictionary. So the mental lexicon, it gives us the properties. You can call it that property, subcategorization frame. So it gives us what are the arguments that the verb, any verb, should take. You see that now. So in 11b, bribe, we know from the lexicon that it needs to take, or you should take two arguments. But then in this case, it only has one argument, and then that's why it's ungrammatical, because where is the second argument? Basically, it's ungrammatical. Now, This is not predicted by the PS rule, because what if you notice the PS rule that we had is that VP should give you a VEd and an NP. That's what that was what we saw, if you remember, in the last class, right? That a VP would have to give you a V and an NP. And then when you have a one-place predicate, 12A is grammatical because it is one-place predicate, Adam slumbered, fine. But 12B is ungrammatical because now we added another argument that is not needed. So Adam slumbered the boy. That is ungrammatical because Adam and slumber does not need an object. It only needs an agent. It only needs a subject. Right now, what happened here? So with 11 and 12, the different property of the verb cannot or is not predicted by the PS rule, but we know this from the lexicon. So what this means is that the PS rule would basically be redundant because it's like the PS rule will say at one point you have just a V. So VP, remember, this will be a VP. So the PS rule would say at one point you have a VP that has only a V, and at another point, in this case where you have a two-place predicate, the PS rule will say you have a VP that does not have only, that doesn't take just the V, but also must take an NP. So you have, optionality in a way. Yeah, this is like an option, but why should we go for this option when we know that the lexicon, we get this information from the lexicon. So the PS rule does not predict, and that is why we say it is redundant. It doesn't predict that we have different verbs. And this is just two place and one place. Remember I said we also have the three-place predicate, like ditransitive, which means that there would be a third rule, which will say the VP takes two NPs, one NP, another NP. And that's not what we want. Because it's like you have in your PS rule different, to accommodate the different subcategorization frame of the different verbs. Okay, so since the distributional property of these verbs are particular to them, such information should be restricted to the lexicon entries, basically. So we can already get this from lexicon entries, and the PS rules does not need to give redundant rules, like having different rules for each of the verbs. And if we allow that, then that means that the more verbs, let's assume, even though it has not been found, I don't know if it exists, let's assume there is a verb that can take maybe a verb that is like six-place predicate. Then that means we would have to assume in our PS rule another rule that says, okay, a V will take NP, 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 so we don't want that. We can just restrict this property that, okay, in the lexicon, each of these verb has, the property, it's restricted rather to the lexical entry. So we know it in the lexicon. It is serious. All right. So I hope that is clear. So, however, the underlying function of the PS rule is still in operation. Remember I said that, right? So, and that is to the question that was asked earlier. The underlying function, which is we want to make syntax explicit. All these things are in the mind of the speaker, but we need to be able to see, want to see how is it represented, what is going on. And that is the underlying assumption or operation. It is still in operation, but we just want to make it as simple as possible. And what that means is that grammar still needs a way to be able to represent or build our structure, right? Because that is the underlying assumption of operation of PS rule. The aim of the PS rule, the motivation of the PS rule in the earlier stages of generative grammar was to be able to represent our structure. That operation, like that assumption, still remains. And there must also be a way to combine lexical items to form larger constituents, basically, right? So be able to combine. Remember, we looked at the constituency test, that even though you have a sentence as a constituent, there are sub-constituents within it. So we should be able to also, have a mechanism that should be able to build such structure, right? And what we saw was that the PS rule, basically, it's a top-down kind of structure because you just have your S and then you have your, right? Because that's what it does. It says a VP would open to a V and then an NP and like that. So you have like a top-down. But this new approach that we want to, that was proposed, which is the X-bar theory, of course, builds the structure from the bottom up. And that is very important because it actually shows constituency using the operation merge. I know most of us are familiar with this already, operation merge, right? You take an element, maybe X, you merge with another one, and then you have a maximal element, or yes, you have like a new element basically. So if you match X and Y, you get Z, you match that new derived element with another element, you can get so like that, like that. So you are merging from bottom to the top, and then each of those merge shows constituency. Now there's something I need to quickly mention here. Maybe okay, I'll mention it when we look at section 4. So it's called extension condition. That is very important when you are building your structure, because that would explain some of the some things that happen when you build your tree. So there is what we call extension condition. Basically, it means that you extend your tree at the roots. Remember, you know that our construction, I mean, when we draw trees in syntax, even though we say we have a tree, but our tree is more like inverted, right? So it's not like the normal tree where it opens this way. It's like a tree where the root is high. The root is high, but then you have it like this downward. So we build our tree downward, not up. Not when I say upward, you know what I mean, basically. Like not like the normal tree. It's like the tree that faces down, basically. Okay. And again, another word you should note is numeration, right? So we've looked at operation merge, which says, I'm going to use the structure in 13 now to explain that later. Operation merge, which says you merge different elements to create a new element or to create a new constituent, right? And this is done with the use of numeration. And what does that mean? So the part of the lexicon where the items are selected from for structure building is technically referred to numeration, basically. So your numeration, so it's like even though you have we know you have the mental lexicon, so you can see enumeration as more like the how do I? So you have the mental lexicon where everything is there, but in the numeration is where you have is like your toolkit. So all the words you need for a particular sentence or for a particular construction, it drops in the numeration. So the numeration is just like a box where you have. So if you want to construct a sentence like Adam ate rice, numeration is like that space where each word that you need will be dropped. Not everything in the lexicon will be there at that moment. So at every moment, at every construction, numeration consists of what you need at a particular time. Okay. Any question? Okay. What's meant by, this is a repeated question, right? What's meant by representation and derivation in these rules? I didn't get, but okay, let me explain the way I understand. I don't know if that would be enough for what I didn't get the question very well, but let me so what you're asking basically is the difference between representation and derivation. I mean, representation is it's just like it's just a way of when you want to represent something that it's, for example, in the mind, right? So if you are representing a tree, or sorry, you are representing a sentence, and then you use a tree, that's a representation. It's really a term that it can be associated to many things. But in our case, when I use the word representation, what I'm saying is how to represent what is in the mind as a speaker or of a language speaker, how to represent it, that abstract thing, and then representing it to that in a way that it's tangible in the sense that you can see. So for example, look at this structure in 13. So the assumption is that this representation is actually in the mind, but then we are representing what is in the mind using a tree. That is representation. Derivation also is similar, of course, but derivation is more like the act of doing it. So you are deriving it. So you derive your structure, like when I talk about top to down or bottom up, that's derivation. So when you derive your structure, you merge two things together, X and Y. That means you have derived a new constituent, and then you merge another thing again, and then you derive a new constituent. So that's derivation when you are deriving, a tree. But representation itself is like making what is abstract explicit using a tree, for example. That is representation. I hope that answers your question. All right. Now, let's look at so all that we've been saying, right? We now want to begin to look at, okay, the different ways of representing now, right? We want to represent the different the structures, and that is one of the aim of generative approach, right? To be able to represent. And remember, we say we want to, because of the redundancy of PS rules, we want to eliminate it. In order to eliminate it, we still need a way to be able to build our structure. And that is one of the motivation for the X bar theory. So we want to take out the redundancy of PS rule. And so in order to do that, we propose another approach that still can represent the internal structure of a language. Now, just a side note, at the end of the day, you will still see that even the X bar theory also became redundant. So lots of redundancies were also, just like what we were trying to avoid, you still fall into that similar trap. Even though, I mean, yes, of course, it was an advancement, but then it had its own issues like redundancy as well. So the elimination of PS rules led to development of X-bar theory. And since the NP contains now, VP contains verb, and then if you have like adjective, that also contains adjective. So we can simply generalize that XP contains or is added by X, basically, where that X would be either noun, the verb, adjective, or even the complementizer. And what this means basically is, remember the same way we saw move alpha, collapsing these different constraints into just move alpha. Anywhere you have transformation that deals with movement, insertion, deletion, you just have affect alpha. That's the same way we are saying now with X-bar theory, that we can actually, instead of having the PS rules with different rules, we can just say there is a single structure that actually collapsed all the PS rules. Remember, with the PS rules, you have each of these phrases with their own rules. NP says you get a head N and then maybe a PP and whatever. VP says you need a V and then you need a hand P. Adjective phrase can say you need an adjective and then an NP, like that, like that, like that. So you see different PS rules. But with X-bar theory, all these rules are collapsed into one, and then we say X. So X stands for N, stands for V, stands for A, stands for whatever. It doesn't, it's just a generic index. You see, so we collapse all these rules. And then 13 is like the schema, where, and the assumption is that every phrase, now I'm using phrase as a cover term, take note. I'm not using phrase as just the way we use phrase as phrase and then sentence. I'm using phrase as a cover term for any construction. Even a sentence in this approach or in this module is assumed to be a phrase. So every phrase would have this structure. That is what Elbert theory proposed, which means when you have an NP, it would have a specifier and then the N ed and also a complement. If it is a VP, it has the same structure. If it is a CP, a IP, whatever P, it has the same structure basically. And that is what Elbert theory proposed. Again, a side note, you notice that as time goes on, of course, we know there are constructions where you might not need the specifier. You might not even need a complement. It can just be a head. For example, a simple noun, Adam. Adam does not have a complement, doesn't have a spec. And that is one of the reasons when I said X-bar theory also has its own redundancy, because X-bar theory says every tree must have this structure, but we know that that's not true. There are phrases that are just bare, like you have a bare noun. All right, but let's just continue. Since we are developing, we are trying to look at the developmental stages. So that was the structure proposed by the Elbert theory. And Again, it's very interesting because it collapsed all the PS rules into one single structure. That all these structures, this structure that are in 13 account for the different PS rules that you can think of. Again, it gives us one machinery instead of many rules. That's simplicity. And it will be easy for the child to learn. Those are the motivations. So with the advent of the X-bar syntax, the theory has succeeded in simplifying the grammar architecture and learning load of the child, right? Those are the two motivations. Those are the things we wanted to achieve. And there was also a transition from the set of rules that are peculiar to individual languages to universal principles of the language faculty. So the assumption is that that structure in 13 is actually present in all languages. So it's like a universal structure of phrases in every language, universal grammar, basically. And this marks the transition of emphasis from descriptive adequacy to explanatory adequacy. And what that means is that now we can be able to, to explain, the question, how language is represented in the mind, basically, and why do we have, like, why is it like what we see, what we hear in language, why is it so, right? Basically. So apart from the X-bar theory, there are other modules, of course. So like what I said here, so this led to the birth of the modular grammar. And what this means is that the grammar actually has different modules. So the grammar is, or you can say, the grammar in the head or the mind of the speaker is divided into different modules, and each modules account for the many rules that we have seen so far, or many constraints, many conditions. And it is important to also note that each of these modules that I'm going to start showing now, they actually they are interrelated. So it's not like they are not like independent of one another. Of course, they have their um peculiarities, like what they really what their function really is. But then at the end of the day, you will see that they are also interconnected. So it's a complex system. It's just like, like the neurons or something, the wiring in our brain, the way it is just interconnected and many things, right? So language. So let's look at let's begin to look at some of the. We've looked at one of the modules, which is the Hilbert theory. We'll look at the other ones, and so that is what this section on principles and parameters consists. I don't know if there's any questions so far. If I continue. Okay, there's a question. So word order variation is under. Yeah. So I will get to this towards the end. I don't know even if we will be able to get to that point in this slide because of the time, but maybe I can make a quick comment. So the issue of the different word orders in S-bar syntax, right? It's basically it's under parameters, right? So remember, we know that principles are the what are like general, like the underlying principles. You can call them the underlying things, underlying mechanisms that are. Okay, you are reading your hand. You want to say something? Please go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Why I asked the question is, you have already mentioned spec, X bar, X head, and all that. So
Yeah.
just to say, if you just make a comment a little to help some people with respect to, yes, that place, the fact that specifier can also be at the right-hand side for some languages, while come to the left-hand side, as we find in Japanese and some other languages. That's why I made that comment. Not that I know we go to variation at the end of the day. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, thank you. The issue will always be what to include and what not to include. This is something that has been for many years, more than 60 years. So there are many literature and everything. You don't know what to include. Yeah. So what Doc just said now is what I said is under parameters. So different languages have the parametric setting. You can call it that way, right? So even though there are general principles in all languages, but then there are different parameters like differences. You can just say differences in different languages. So English would use this kind of setting, right? Where you have English is head first. So you would have spec, the head, and then the comp. But then there are languages that would have it the other way around, where you would have this would be the X bar, and then this would be the spec. The spec is to the left. Don't mind I'm not using tablet, I'm using the laptop, so it's difficult to. And then you have your X here, the head. So it's more like the mirror image, right? The mirror image of what we have in 13. So then you have your comp. Yeah. So it's just a mirror image, basically. So there are languages that have such structure. And these such languages are basically, I mean, you mentioned Japanese already, yes, Japanese and Turkish. So like SOV languages, because if you have maybe not SOV, so this would be more like OVS, yeah, because you would have your object, for example, here, you have your verb, and then you have your subject, for example, here. But of course, there are other ordering also apart from this. So you can also have a case where the spec remains at the initial position, but then the differences is with the X and the comp. So you can have, you still have your spec here. So you still have a spec, and then you have your X bar. But then instead of having X, you have a comp. And then the X. So this will be languages where usually this will be SOV languages. So you have your X. And SOV, it means subject, verb, object. So S, subject, V, verb, O, object. So in English, this would be what you have in English in 13. So you have your subject in the spec, and then you have your verb in the head of the X, and then you can have your object here if you have like a simple VB structure, right? But languages like Japanese, where you have SOV, it will look like this, where the spec is still here with the subject, and then you have the object, but then the V, SOV. So subject, verb, subject, object, and then the verb. So since I'm mentioning it here, I think I still have something to discuss about this at the end. But I don't know, again, we might not get there. But yeah, just to know that there are different parametric settings. But if you notice the three structures, the emphasis remains the same, which is that there has to be a spec, a comp, and a V, like a head rather, a hex. So those two, the structure remains, the underlying structure remains. The difference is just we see the different head parameter depending on the language you are considering. All right. It seems there are questions online.
Yes, there's a question. Somebody is asking, what does X in X bar theory mean? I know you mentioned that earlier. Maybe the person wasn't paying enough attention earlier.
Yeah, so X is just a notation. You can call it a notation or like a generic something. So it can mean n. Look at this. So just look at this. This is it here. So X can mean n. Remember, the phrase structure rules has different rules for each of these categories, but X now stands for all of them. Just X, you see. So it can mean n, it can mean a verb, it can mean an adjective, it can mean complementary and the like. So X just takes all of them. So it's more like a generic notation to represent all of them. I hope that answers that. Okay. There are people in the waiting room. Okay, so our time is almost up. And we still have a lot to do. But yeah, if we can finish this, we can continue on Friday, and maybe we can also move to minimalism. Let's see how it goes. All right. Any other question? No question on the chat. So
Somebody is asking, can we have multiple X bar?
Yeah.
What is happening when we have two comps?
Yeah, I like that question. That's nice. Yes, we can have multiple X bar, and you have multiple X bar. I mean, it depends on the way you want to do your structure, you have multiple X bar when you want to have like adjunct. And you have adjunction, multiple X bar, or you can also use multiple XP. So there are different ways. So if you have adjunct, like for example, Adam ate rice yesterday. So yesterday as an adverb or adjunct, right? So usually it's assumed that adjuncts are merged. I mean, depending on, okay, don't worry about that. So are merged usually at the bar level. But of course, you can also merge adjuncts at the maximal level. So maybe I didn't also talk about that. This will be a maximal projection. This will be the intermediate projection, and this will be the zero level. That is the head. So the head is the zero level. The X bar is the intermediate level, and then the XP is the maximal level of the tree. And you notice that whatever is the head is what projects up, or what that is what gives you the projection, the name of your projection. So if you have a V in this position, which means it will mean that what we have here is a VP. Remember, we're using X to just represent all the possible categories. If your X here is a C, or okay, I don't want to use C because we've not started looking at C. If your X is like an N, then this will be an NP, you see? So the head is actually what projects to give you what your phrase looks like. So it is possible to have a structure where there is double X bar. And in that case, it's because you want to have an adverb, you want to attach an adverb to it. So you can have, it's possible. And then you also ask if it is, what is happening when we have two comp? What do you mean? Two comp? You cannot have two comp. So each head takes a complement. Except for if you have, okay, yeah, if you have the transitive, right? So like Adam gave the book to the boy. It's you have to be careful calling those two the complement of the V. Yes, they are, like, literally they are complement of the V, of course. But then we know that to the boy, so the boy is more of the complement to the two, right? But then to the boy itself, of course, will be like a complement to the V. And then the structure is complex. I really do not want to go to that. So the structure of the transitive is another. It's really an interesting area, actually. If in case you are looking for maybe a research topic, the transitive is a hot topic and is interesting. Its structure, it's not yet agreed. There's a lot going on with that. Okay, I think it says about theory more descriptive or explanatory. Okay, I think Mr. Basil is already doing some justice in
Sorry,
the
I
chat, so I
think
can continue.
that question I dropped something, but that is different from what he's asking. And then my what I dropped has to do with what the other guy was asking. If we can have multiple instances of X bar. So I mentioned that the man in the room beside the river by the end of the village, we definitely show multiple instances of that. But this person is asking Malak Kubayu, is asking if X bar theory is more descriptive or explanatory. That is the nature. I think this is more like a conceptual or theoretical question.
Yeah. Good. Very good. I mean, I like these questions that you were asking, really. So remember that if you notice, I keep making a comment, and the comment is like we must be careful to not dissociate things. It's more like a continuum. See it as a continuum. So X bar theory, and not just X bar theory, the principal and parameters theory itself, it's like an analysis or a mechanism or an approach towards explanatory adequacy. So the PS rule is more descriptive. It's just describing what you have, the fact of the language, right? You have a VP, then you have a V and then an NP to for that VP and everything like that, right? So X bar theory and the principal parameters theory is not like in this case we are discarding descriptive, because of course we are still describing. But in our description, there is more explanatory power. And what does that mean? It means that we are able to actually have principles that can explain the underlying properties that we find in languages, which the PS rule or even the early PS rule, which is under the early generative grammar, could not do. So in the PS rule and the early generative grammar, it was more descriptive, not explanatory really. It was more descriptive. But in the P&P, which SBA is part of it, we now have a way to actually explain some things, to explain why. It's like answering the question why. But it doesn't mean that we discard descriptive. I mean, we still describe. Even till today, we still describe. Those 3 levels of adequacy are still intact. It's just that each approach, what each approach does, like each development in generative grammar, it gives more strength or more argument to, those different levels of adequacy. That's why you call them levels of adequacy. Even though the 3, if you are going to analyze your language, those 3 have to be in mind. You have to observe, you have to describe, you have to explain. But the power of each of them were strengthened depending on this difference. So it's like, correspondence, a matching the different adequacies with the different development in syntax. It doesn't mean that we're discarding any of them. Okay. I will try and stop somewhere because of the time is almost up, so that if there are questions. So within the principles and parameters theories, it's important. Maybe you've seen this before. Usually we, of course, use the term government and binding. So you might have noticed I've been calling it the principles and parameters, but maybe you are familiar more with government and binding theory. And government and binding theory, of course, Chomsky actually dislikes that terminology because it gives undue importance to only 2 of the modules. There are other modules, not just government and binding. So even though people use this term for this theory, and that is and understandably so. So why? Because the first time when he started developing this theory was when he gave a lecture on government and binding. So he was the one who actually he gave a topic. So he had a topic for his paper or a topic for his talk on government and binding theory, right? But as time goes on, there were many other principles, but people just picked the title of that paper or lecture rather, which is government and binding theory, and people use it today, right? But I will continue to use principles and parameters because that gives a wider scope of what the theory is all about. So again, to remind you, the question was that we've been looking at is how is language acquired, right? So syntactically, we want to see how language is acquired. And to answer this question, the answer to this question culminates in the proposal of different innate modules of grammar. Expert theory, which we've looked at. There is also binding theory. There is locality and bounding theory. There is control theory and theta theory. I made them together, but you see why. Case theory and also government. So these are the different modules. In some literature, of course, they are separated. In some literature, you have expert theory, binding theory, bounding theory, control theory separately from theta theory. Case theory is separate from government also. So almost 7 or 8 of them, right? Okay. So these modules were actually dedicated to capturing specific generalizations, which would have otherwise resulted in the proliferation of rules, like we've seen already for the expert theory, right? So instead of having many PS rules, we can just have an expert theory that has just that structure in 13, which is assumed to represent every structure possible that you can think of. And the noticeable differences in languages are just as a result of different ways these modules function, as well as differences in the lexicon, basically. So what you find in Hausa or in Yoruba, or the difference that you find in these languages is just the interaction between these different modules. I think I'm going to stop here. Maybe we can continue because of our time. I can take 1 or 2 questions and then we can continue on Friday.
Lavina is asking, did the principles and parameters come after expert theory or before? I don't know.
So
want to
principles and
answer?
parameters. You said we're saying something.
Okay, I said okay. Go ahead and answer. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe because I understand why you asked that question, because I spoke about S-bar theory before this section 5, right? So principal parameters theory is just the approach, is the development, you know. Look at the way it is. Okay, the simple answer is S-bar theory is part of the principal parameters theory. That's the simple answer, right? But then the transformational generative grammar itself is, or generative approach, you can call it that way, generative approach is a long-term tradition. It's like a tradition, it's like an approach. And then there are developments within that approach. One of the developments is what we looked at last week, right? The phrase structure rules. Now we are looking at principles and parameters. It's still under the generative approach, Chomsky's generative approach. Now the principles and parameters have different principles, and S-bar theory is one of it. Like I mentioned here, so S-bar theory is one of it. I only give S-bar theory earlier because of what I've explained about operation merge under this section. So it's like a continuum, but S-bar theory is a module. That's even the simple answer. S-bar theory is a module within the principles and parameters approach or theory.
Okay, let me just add that X-bar theory is like a way that Chomsky tries to explain phrase structure itself. Just like we are talking about merge now in minimalism. Merge is taking care of phrase structure again, without, while other things are still found in minimalism. So principles and parameters itself is, like you said, a theory of acquisition, which even has continued up to minimalism. So it's an approach. X-bar is just one of the instances in which the goal of principles and parameters, where the authors try to achieve the goals of principles and parameters. So X-bar specifically deals with the phrase structure to replace PS rules and all that, and to show how the structure of a phrase. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? So I will stop here. Time is so next class, which is on Friday, we can start with binary theory, and then let's hope we can go into minimalism. If we can't, I would prepare the handout. I can always give you the handout, but let's hope we can enter minimalism. Any other question? But of course, you can already go through this handout so that on Friday it will be very easy. We can probably move faster. Any question, clarification, comments? Okay, no question, no comments. Let me come back. Okay, there's a question there. Your Mr. Kolawole, your hand is raised. Can you ask your question, please? Go
Okay,
ahead.
good
Ask your
afternoon,
question.
Doctor.
Good afternoon.
It's a privilege to be in the midst of great minds here today. I usually have a problem when it comes to X-bar theory then during my postgraduate or my MA level. And I think I have a simplification to that approach now. You've really done well. But I'm still looking at the correlation between bare free structure and S-bar theory in minimalist. We have the bare free structure in minimalist and the S-bar theory.
Yeah.
So I don't think maybe in the next class that could be more adequacy will be given to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll note that down. Yeah. So basically, for those that probably are wondering the best phrase structure is more of the minimalist way of representing X-bar theory or even phrases like syntactic structures. So I will try and take note of that in the next class.
Which is still controversial anyway, as some people really don't toe the line of that BPS fully. As you remember, Chomsky's 2013 and some other guys who have been doing a lot of things are happening. Even the BPS, not everybody has accepted it as
Yeah, I
it
mean
is.
that's syntax, right? That's just it's just the way it is. I always say you just you pick what you want, what you necessary for you, and at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, you would have to um believe in one more than the other. That's just it, right? So
And the labeling
yeah,
algorithm
yeah,
coming in all this is. So
yeah,
like Collins elimination of labels, people are doing stuff.
yeah.
I think because of this confusion, maybe we should read this recent post that Chris Collins made. I think that was last week. That
Mm-hmm.
is just at the heart of this thing he's talking about. I will drop the link in the WhatsApp group for people
Yes,
to
please do
look
so
at
that.
it. Because people pursue some researches in syntax go different directions. Like that BPS is going deeper into theoretical issues more than empirical. I don't think there's any language that we really fit into BPS as it is. But that's the goal. And as they're pursuing that, they're looking at a final way to label structures that will reflect more simplified approach. But at the end of the day, you find out that you still struggle. Like the controversy between DP and NP, whether we should discard NP entirely or
Yeah,
retain them. Those are the issues. Thank you.
yeah. You've raised many advanced advanced issues. We are very interested, right? So yeah, I mean the labeling itself, right? So maybe for those that are just hearing it, so the labeling algorithm or whatever I want to call it, it's more like it gives a kind of structure where, so I mean, in the S-bar theory, the head of the phrase like the X can project or even project, and then you get the maximum projection. But with the labeling algorithm, there are different. I mean, for me, right, it's like it also has its rules. It's more like rules. Like, okay, for you to project the maximum projection, there are times that it is not the head that is actually projecting. There are in a way there are times where it is the strength of the phrases that you merge. So if you merge two phrases, the strength of, depending on how you, of course, there are ways of the way they define those strengths. So the strength of any of the merged constituents will determine what projects. So unlike what we know or what is a common way of projection where the head would always have to project, right? So yeah, it's just like you said, it's an advancement. Yes, it's making things simple. I don't know if I would say yes to it making things simple really, because it's more like syntacticians, we try to complicate things, and then empirical facts. And that is why African languages are very important actually, because for example, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this terminology, final over final constraint, FOFC. It's when it first came out, it was assumed that, I mean, it's a principle that says if you have, let's go to this structure. I'll use this to explain. Look at this structure in 13. So the final over final condition says that you can only have a head final structure dominating another head final. So it's like you can only have a structure like this where you have let's call this, let me use X. Yeah, let's use X. Okay, let's use spec first. So if you say you have, it doesn't even matter. Yeah. Don't mind my structure. So you can say you can have maybe a spec. I'll just use SP for spec, and then you have X bar, and then you have a YP, and if you have the head of your x, of the x rather here, and then, so in this YP, final over final condition says that I will just represent the head here, just y. So if you have a structure like this, it's fine. So it's final over final. It means the final, the dominating head is final, head final, and that must also dominate a head final construction. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you have a structure where you have head final dominating head initial, it's assumed that it's ungrammatical, and that has been shown for many. So if you say, if you have again the spec, then you have your YP. Where now you have, again, the final is here, right? But then the Y, the head of the YP is here, and then you have maybe your complement. So don't mind me, I excluded the spec just because of, don't worry about the spec. What is important is the head. Now, the final over final condition says this structure is bad. And many languages have shown that, right? Many, like German, like many of these European languages, shows that you cannot have a head final constraint phrase dominating a head initial. It has to be head final. So it's like, that's where the name comes from. Final over final. It means whenever the higher head is final, then the lower head must also be final. And not the case where the higher head is final and then you have an initial lower head. That is not allowed. Right. Now, why am I bringing this up? On top of some, many of these, this constraint was basically proposed based on many of these European languages. But when you look at African languages, there are some exceptions. Even though, yes, there are ways to explain around it, but there are exceptions. There are things that actually show exceptions to this constraint. There are languages like Ikale. So Ikale, I'm working on Ikale. Right? I wrote my master dissertation on Ikale, where the focus marker in Ikale is actually final. It's a final. So if you say something like it is rice that are they ate, it will be something like rice are they ate, and then the focus marker is the sentence final position. Now, in that case, what you would have is a case where the head, the focus head in final position, is dominating a TP that is head initial. But that sentence, a TP, head initial, but that sentence is grammatical in Ikale. It's not bad. You see? So this is just to show that many of these advancement or development, in minimalism, in generative grammar, they are more Eurocentric, if you call it. But of course, we know that when you bring some of them into African languages or lesser or understudied languages, there are many exceptions, really. And that is why it's interesting to look at many of these our languages that shows exceptions to this, right? So, all right, so that was a lot. Let me stop. Any question? Created in Ikale. I'm not an Ikale speaker. I'm just working on Ikale. Let me see if I can remember. So you can see something like Ade Je Ejije. So Ade ate food, something like, yeah, Ade Ejije. I hope I'm correct. If I have Ikale speaker yet, please don't find me. I'm just trying to remember because it's been a while. And then if you want to have a focus, maybe on, so if you say Aderi Aderibola, because yeah, but Ri is still the way Ikale uses, just the way you have in the standard Yoruba. Aderibola. Now you want to focus Bola, it becomes Bola Aderi Rin, where you have Rin or In. I mean, depending, there are some scholars that use In, but when I did my own illustration, it was Rin that I found. Bola Aderi Now you have the focus marker at the end of the sentence. Why Bola is still fronted, and then you have the subject Ade, and then you have the verb Ri, but then you have the focus marker at the end of the sentence. You see, so the focus, unlike many of our languages like Yoruba or many other languages, that the focus marker will immediately follow the fronted constituent, right? But in Ikale, it's like you have the focus, and then you have the subject, you have the verb, and then you have the focus marker sentence finally. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I gave, thank you. Yeah, Emmanuel. Yeah, I gave a talk on that in Leiden. I think that's early this year or last year. Yeah. Admin, if you do not stop us, we will not stop us.
Oh, this thing, we have to stop. Oh.
So, admin, whether you
Let's
stop us
release
or not, we'll
Ogadan to
continue.
go and rest a little.
I mean, it's not even me.
Please.
I enjoy discussing this. If people want to wait behind, if admin allow us, we can keep discussing, but I don't know, because there's another class. So I'm a
Thank you
man
so
under
much.
authority. So
I was just, in fact, at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, one thing that has just been running through my head is the way you're able to bring in so many things together without making it too complex. People may not know what you went through, the struggle to
yeah, it's a lot.
simplify some of all these things. I remember there was a time my supervisor told me to write something and send to him that he wanted to use it in a class. I think that was I think last year or so. When I sent it to him, he started shouting at me. I was like, what is it? He said, it is too complicated for the people he wanted to use it for. And he told me it was actually first year PhD students. So, but at the end of the day, so sometimes people just accuse us of making things complicated, but it's not that. It's just a question of the field itself. Like the Python thing last time, people were complaining, but the Oga who is teaching cannot go below that. I think people should just maybe try to read up. Maybe, I don't know. Yes, you dropped references.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
maybe just choose one for us or for
In
the
fact,
class. People should read.
yes. So, I mean, I
That
think
will
people have
help.
preferences, but if you ask me, one of the introduction to Synta like that really, I mean, maybe minimalism now. If you talk about minimalism, that's what's it called, Vijay Cook and Newson. I mean, that was the
Yeah,
first one I read, of course. That was the first book I read on minimalism and everything. It's I think for me it was simple, right? But of course, I believe there might be simpler at Aja too. Yes, Aja, because I remember I taught a syntax class last semester, this concluded semester, and we used Aja, David Aja. It was, yeah, again, I enjoyed it, even though it's a big, like 10 chapters, a lot of pages. But since it was like a weekly class, so we were able to read 20 pages per week, like that. So we were able to cover it. So that's another nice book. And in case maybe there are
with somebody who wants to do analysis, because
you said,
almost everything there will be an analysis for it.
yes.
And
Yes.
then that
So
Cook analysis, like you said, will help with the concepts, the basic concepts, and even extend it to second language situation for those who are interested.
yeah.
But I also think that even understanding minimalism by Norbert Hornstein and then Grumman and the other guy, Jairo Nunes, I think
Yeah,
it's still
Hieronymus.
good, especially if you look at these areas, because they covered areas that are already connected in the what do you call it now? In the PMP, earlier years of PMP. So, but only problem is if you need to understand GB very well to be able to
Exactly. Yeah.
connect some of the
Yeah.
But one thing I like about them is that each chapter they review GB before going into minimalism. So you see how everything works.
Yeah.
Another one is Kani. Kani is still good. For me, Kani is still good. For people who
Dr.
have done
Basil, we have seen your fields.
Sir?
You will not let us
Ma?
go now. You have seen your field.
Hey,
You have seen your field now. You will not let us go.
I beg, stop it.
That
I
is
beg,
your field now. So
Okay. What about this one, Koopman? The one that Koopman and this
Sorry,
guy.
before we go further, I think I will have to stop the recording to prevent it being
that's true.
lengthened.
Yeah,
Please
yeah,
stop
yeah.
it. Mr. Sam.